Well, hi, this is Pete King, and I'm coming to you from Perdido Key, Pensacola, the Gulf Coast area around Orange Beach and Gulf Shores. And I've got another Perdido perspective for you. Today I wanted to talk to you, as many of you have utilized me as a realtor before, you know that I have to say a lot about what it takes to go from a contract to a closing. So I wanted to lay all that out for you today because it is a very important and maybe the most difficult portion of your purchasing a new piece of property. And I want to give you one of my first big tips, and that is rely on professionals to get you from that contract that you've just negotiated and spent your hard-earned emotion on getting signed and all the terms are where you want them. So now let's work our way through with professionals that can help you as you go from contract to closing. The buyer has certain responsibilities, and this also applies to the seller because the seller has some responsibilities, and one of the major ones the seller has is to himself, meaning that the seller should confirm that the buyer and his agent and his team of professionals or her team of professionals get all of the things done that need to be getting done between now and when you close. So we have checklists basically. And so do these other professionals. So the one professional that you're going to want is you want to get a competent real estate agent. Secondly, you want to make sure that the closing agent or the closing attorney and his staff are readily available for any of your questions. And if you're going after financing, make sure that you have a very competent loan officer and that they have the kind of staff that can support you from this point of signing the contract and getting to the closing table. Here's my other big tip. Put it on your calendar that every single week you contact these three professional teams that you essentially have hired. So put it on your calendar. Make sure you call them once a week. Communication is going to be the key to success to get from this contract to closing. So now what I want to do is I want to use the contract actually, and I'm going to use the CRISP contract. There's the FAR bar as well in Florida, and in Alabama there is a separate contract, but they all basically lay out the same timeline. And so let's go through that so we can make sure we hit every point that we want to hit. First is the earnest money deposit. This is the deposit that we all consider as earnest money that goes in escrow from the buyer, and it needs to go into an escrow account either at the real estate broker's office, or most times it goes to an attorney or an escrow company where it is held in case there is any kind of dispute within the contract. That has to be in typically 3 days from when the contract is executed. Sometimes it's more. In our particular area, as a matter of fact, it tends to be a little bit more because most of our buyers are out of state. So if they have gone home and then submitted a contract, it may take a few days for us to get this earnest money deposit. But you have to get a verification from the escrow company that takes it, and that's going to be an important part of the closing papers that we will have when we finally sit down at that table. Next on the contract is the financial contingencies. If you're financing this property, you have certain days in which you must make application, typically 5, and get a commitment from the bank that you are good for this loan. And this is a big step, and it takes some time. It could take as much as 30 days, but certainly it has to be registered with the seller that you have a commitment 10 days from the closing date. So, financial contingencies are an important part of what the buyer needs to march through and the seller needs to confirm. Even if it's a cash deal, sometimes the seller, and in most cases as a real estate, I would ask that the seller request from the buyer proof of funds. In other words, do they really have this money in some account that's readily available? If not, we may end up with a problem down the road when we get close to closing. So that's the next point. When are we going to close? Well, it has to be distinctly mentioned in the contract. In Florida, it's an absolute requirement. It can't be 30 days from execution. It can't be in anything like that. It actually has to be a specific date. And there's a lot of reasons for that, obviously, because there are things that the seller and the buyer have to do by that date, and you don't want that date to be wishy-washy. So for instance, the seller, by closing, has got to make sure that all trash is removed. Any personal items that may be excluded in the contract, they need to be removed. The seller has to produce keys, maybe a garage door opener or more than one garage door opener. Certainly if there is a privacy situation, there is either coding on the doors of the dwelling, or there are gate codes because it's a gated community. Those are all things that the seller has to make sure he lines up by that date, so that date's really important. The other probably most important thing is so that the title company knows when they have to produce clear title and produce a deed for that seller to sign and to transfer to the buyer. So, title company needs to know that date. They need to know everything in this contract, which is probably one of the things that we should have on our checklist. Make sure, buyer or seller, that you have gotten a copy of the contract and all of the addenda to the agent who's going to close the deal, the title agent. Typically that's an agent who works for an attorney, but they have a significant staff. But make sure that that legal entity that's closing the deal has a copy of the contract and all the addenda that might affect the contract. All right, so the other thing we want to talk about that's in the contract are inspections. And there are a lot of inspections that can be made on a property depending on what it is. Condos are a little bit different than homes. For instance, there's probably not going to be a wood destroying organism inspection on a condominium that's made of concrete and steel. But if it's a condo or a townhouse that's made of wood, then that might be an important part of the inspections that should be conducted. When I say inspections, most people think I'm talking about home inspections, and certainly that's one of the most important things that you can do. Very inexpensive insurance to know that you are getting exactly what you think you're getting, and there are no warrantable items that are not working. What's warrantable? Well, it's basically things that are not cosmetic. I could give you a whole list, but we're talking about appliances, plumbing, electrical, and those kind of things. And the home inspection, if it's a residential single-family dwelling, typically will include a 4-point inspection, which I'll let you go look that up, but a 4-point inspection essentially is for the 4 major components of a home so that the home is insurable. If you don't get a 4-point, typically either you can't get insurance or it's going to be a lot more expensive than you think. Talked about WDO. This is basically a termite inspection, and there are a lot of different things if you don't get a clean WDO. A clean WDO means that there's been no evidence of wood-destroying organisms or molds or mildews or other things, and so a clean inspection means you're ready to go. If it's not clean, there are some other things that we need to go through as far as treatment, maybe repair, those kind of things that are all part of this inspection process. You also might want to think about whether the bond, if there is a termite bond on the property, is transferable. You need to do this prior to the closing. If any of these other inspections, things like mold inspection, a survey, which is an inspection of sorts, a flood zone survey, another inspection of sorts. If there are problems due to any of these inspections, home inspection, WDO, survey, or anything else, then the seller typically has so many days to rectify the situation so that the transaction can go forward to closing. Whew, almost there. So, some of the other things we need to think about is a few days before the closing. So 3 or 4 days before a closing, typically what you will get is a closing statement. And I say you, I mean both buyer and seller. Their agents will be able to review this with their customers and make sure that such things as prorations, so taxes that have been either paid in arrears or paid up front, are prorated back to the person who does not own the property and the person who does own the property going forward, buyer and seller. And there will be also things like an estoppel letter. For instance, if an HOA is involved or a master association and a condo association, there might even be assessments that need to be recognized. And these assessments could be public, meaning the government has stepped in and said that, for instance, this subdivision needs a new sewer system, and they're going to assess the entire subdivision to get it done. Or it could be an HOA assessment. The HOA of a condominium has decided to paint the entire building in the next year, and so they have assessed the owners, the seller now, the buyer after closing, to pay for this assessment. All those things will be considered when you're looking at the closing statement 3 or 4 days beforehand. Also think about 3 or 4 days beforehand that you have the utilities changed over. You might want to consider that it's insured on the date that there is an exchange of ownership. So these are all things that should be considered 3 or 4 days prior to the closing. Again, lean on your team of professionals. Your agent will be your number one go-to person, whether that person is just a single agent or has a staff. They're going to be your go-to person to make sure that 3 or 4 days before closing, there are no surprises, because that's the number one problem that we see. It's 3 or 4 days beforehand, we have a surprise. So now let's go to 1 day before. So we're going to close tomorrow. One of the things that we'll probably want to do is do a final walkthrough. We want to allow the buyer to get access to the property and do a final walkthrough. Because if there were inspections, whether that was WDO inspection or whether that's a home inspection that required repairs, then the seller should have completed those repairs by the day of closing. So that final walkthrough is a confirmation by the buyer that things are great and they are ready to close the next day. You want to transfer the earnest money deposit. Remember, we talked about that way back when. That was the first thing we talked about. Well, if it's in the real estate company, in the broker's account, and the closing attorney is over here, then that earnest money deposit has to be transferred over here so that the buyer gets credit for it on the closing statement and has the right amount of money coming to the table to close. So earnest money transfer. We might also want to consider wiring funds. So if this is an out-of-state transaction, many of them are when they're condos on the beach, then the buyer needs to wire funds into the closing attorney's office so that he can or she can disperse those funds to the seller and to the parties that are on that closing statement that need funds dispersed from that closing. So wiring instructions might be an important thing to make sure we have the day before. And then finally, one thing that is often forgotten is if this is what we call a mail out, or again, an out-of-state buyer, or even an out-of-state seller, and there are papers to be signed, in many cases, they need to be signed in front of a notary. So if that's the case, make sure that you have lined up a notary, and when you get your FedEx package and you're ready to sign on the dotted line, that can be notarized so that it is a legal closing. Whew, man, a lot of stuff to do. And that's really the point of this discussion, is I want to make sure that you know that there's a lot of stuff to do, and there are professionals out there that will help you get from this contract to closing. Now all you got to do is sign about 500 times and the deal is done. No, it's not quite that bad. But if there is financing, do expect that there will be a significant amount of paperwork to take care of in front of a notary public. So, to review, we want to make sure that we choose a competent real estate agent. Typically, of course, that's the agent that you have negotiated a deal with. But even if you've negotiated a deal outside of a realtor, it might be a good idea to hire one and pay them a flat fee so that their staff can run you through all of these things that you need to do to get from contract to closing. It's really a good consideration if you have a for sale by owner that goes that route and now you're trying to get to closing. Also, lean on the closing attorney and his or her staff. They're going to know how to do this because they've done it hundreds and hundreds of times. They've got all the checklists to make sure that everything gets done. And if you call them weekly, which is what I told you early on in this video, then you're going to get the kind of help and information you need so that a couple days before closing, there are no surprises. And lastly, if there is financing on this property, stay in touch with your lender. That tends to be the greatest delay that we have in closings. Is something within that 3 or 4 days doesn't get done, the lender's underwriter or staff forgot something, or they didn't ask you for the right thing and now they have to ask you for the right thing. So watch the lender closely with a strong communications program. Well, congratulations. You have signed a contract. You have got a good deal for yourself, and now you are through the closing, and the deed will be delivered to you so that you are an owner of a new piece of property. This is Pete King, and I'm coming from Perdido Key, and I wanted to let you know if you need me for anything, to please call me. I'm at 850-261-3938 or Pete at perdidopete.com.